Hey everybody, welcome back to Battlestar Galactica Remembered, the show where we take a look at all things Battlestar Galactica, the production as well as costumes and props. And now we're full into those. We hope you enjoyed the content that I'm giving you here about our favorite television show. Got a lot more for you, so make sure you subscribe and like the channel and spread the word. It's kind of slow. It's a new channel, I know, but if you like all things Battlestar, this is the place to be. Original 1978 version, that is. So let's go ahead and get to our content today about the show itself. And you see on the thumbnail the beautiful Jane Seymour as the Capricorn newswoman Serena. She was a guest star for Saga of a Star World. At least that's what the original plan was supposed to be. That's with all things Battlestar. Things didn't go quite the way we think they are. And Jane Seymour was no exception on there. By the way, there's a lot of just incredible guest stars in Battlestar Galactica. Not only Saga of a Star World, I'll do a show about that, but also throughout the whole series with, Patrick McNee and Fred Astaire and Ray Bolger, Bobby Van, Lloyd Bridges, all these great actors, right, who guest starred in the show. So it's awesome that they were able to attract the caliber of talent that they did. So for Saga of a Star World, Jane Seymour, she had been coming, she was up and coming in the 70s. Remember, she was Bond girl, Solitaire in 1973's Live and Let Die. She had started some limited series in England and some early films and that sort of thing. And so she was a real up-and-comer at the time, especially in the film industry. And Glenn Larson and all, they got Jane Seymour to come and lend that air of respectability and, kind of sophistication with her character of Serena. The character was originally called Lyra, by the way. Also Apollo. His character's first name was Skylar in the first drafts of the scripts, but they ended up changing those, of course, to Apollo ultimately, and to Serena. And so Jane Seymour was contracted to play the Capricorn newswoman Serena in Saga of a Star World, and that was it. She was only going to star in Saga of a Star World, the premiere episode. Well, what happens? Well, we know that she ultimately does come back and also stars in Lost Planet of the Gods, the second of the episodes that aired. That was aired as a two-part episode over 2 different Sundays, right after Saga of a Star World aired. And so ultimately, she's killed off, right, as we know, the very tragic death of Serena at the end of Lost Planet of the Gods. But did you know that Serena, her character, has the dubious distinction of being killed off twice in the first 2 episodes? That's right. Now you're saying, wait a minute. She didn't. When was the first time she was killed off? Well, that's the thing. That's the question. Well, what happened? Well, originally, the way it was shot, Saga of a Star World, Jane Seymour's character of Serena ultimately gets diagnosed with basically a poisoning caused by the plutonium bombs, by the Cylon attack. And so you remember when Apollo and Boomer and them, they were looking for food, because they said they had to jettison like half the food and all that, and they were facing a crisis. And so the reason why is because it was contaminated by the plutonium, the poisoning from the Cylon attack and the bombs and everything. Well, apparently Serena gets this contamination, and there are many scenes throughout the whole second half of Saga of a Star World where she's meeting with Dr. Pi. He was the doctor who you may remember, because the only time we ended up seeing him was when he fixes Cassiopeia's arm. Well, the actor John Fink, who played Dr. Pi, he even gets pretty good billing. You notice at the very beginning of the movie, John Fink's name is one of those in the crawl and all that. So he got kind of top billing up there. Not top billing, but one of the guest stars. And ultimately, he hardly ever came out in the show. Well, why is that? Well, what happened? Serena's character gets this poison, and she was going to die. It was terminal. And so that kind of leads her to get close to Apollo, as we know. Why? Well, because she needed someone to take care of Boxy. And so it really opens up a question as to, well, if that had happened, why, was that the reason why she kind of got close to Apollo? Was it just to get Boxy, to be taken care of by him? Or did she really love Apollo and was just lamenting the fact that she was not going to be able to go on? That opens up that question mark. It gets a little dicey there, right? Maybe she was getting close to Apollo just because she needed someone to take care of Boxy. That could be an interesting dilemma, right? Well, it wasn't to be. Now, what happened? We don't see any of that. All of that was cut out of Saga of a Star World. Well, what happened was the ABC TV executives, as we know, we've referred to this already before several times, they decide to change everything from a miniseries to a weekly series. And so once that happened, Glenn Larson goes, well, hey, we got this good thing. Jane Seymour's here, and she's developing this love interest with Apollo, right? So maybe we can continue that. So Glenn Larson calls Jane Seymour, and he says, hey, Jane, we want you back. And so Jane Seymour, she's mentioned this before in an anecdote about it, and she said she took his call, and she said, like, you want me back? What do you mean? Serena died. How do you want me back? Like I'm back. And so she was kind of baffled by it all. Well, he says, don't worry, we'll fix it all. We'll fix it all. So ultimately, what happens is Jane Seymour does agree to come back for one more episode, Lost Planet of the Gods. But she did not want to do a weekly series at the time. She wanted to be free for film work, which of course she did. She went and did many other films after that and stuff like that. And so she did not want to. So ultimately, her character, of course, is killed off on screen by the Cylons at the end of Lost Planet of the Gods. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. She was going to die off screen, but it was, obviously we knew what was going to happen to her, and that's why she got close to Apollo so that he could take care of Boxy. And so ultimately, all of those scenes, like I mentioned, were cut out. She lives, of course, comes back, marries Apollo, and then, of course, their love is much more true. It's developed, it's real, it's true, and it is a tragic thing when Serena is killed at the end of Lost Planet of the Gods. And so one of the most emotional things, I truly believe the most emotional scenes of the entire show, when Serena dies at the end of Lost Planet of the Gods. That's rough watching right there. I get choked up every time I see that. I don't like watching the end of Lost Planet because it is so sad. But anyway, that's what happened. What could have been. One thing that we also think about that is that since she did not continue, you don't have this little nuclear family. Think about that. In Battlestar Galactica, we don't ever see that. We don't ever see, a father, a mother, and children, especially being, major characters of the show. Wouldn't that dynamic have been very interesting to see with Apollo and all the risky missions he has to take, and a wife, who's also like starting to come along and go on missions also, and Boxy, the child. I mean, that would have been an interesting dynamic, an interesting thing to see, but we never got to see that, just a tiny little bit there, like when Apollo and Serena argue, that kind of thing. And we never got to see that because she was killed off. But anyway, that's the story of Jane Seymour and her character of Serena, one of the most well-loved characters of all Battlestar Galactica, I think. And only was there for 2 episodes, Saga of a Star World and Lost Planet of the Gods. But anyway, that is Jane Seymour's involvement. Of course, by the way, she did end up doing a weekly episodic television later on in the 90s, when, of course, she got the main role of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And we all know that. And she ran with that series for quite a few years and was a very successful show in her own right. So anyway, she did it, but didn't want to do it in the late 70s. And you can understand why, because she was really an up-and-comer and really was wanting to do films and that sort of thing. But we're glad that we got Jane Seymour in Battlestar, at least for 2 episodes, because she was very memorable, and her performance leaves a lasting impression on not only us, the fans, but also in the storyline too, with Apollo, especially as we go through all the way the series, right? So anyway, hope you enjoyed this one. Long live Battlestar Galactica, and I will see you in the next video.